Hi, this is Danny Ryan, the VP of Business Development for ThreeWell, and I'm here with Eric Bowden. Eric is a principal consultant for ThreeWell. Thanks for joining me, Eric.
Great, Danny. Thanks for having me.
And today, what we wanted to do was cover a recent post that Eric had written on the top 5 ways that your application can be built on SharePoint in Office 365. So Eric, first question really is why write this? What were you thinking when you were putting this blog post together?
Well, I think foremost, Office 365, it's a great platform for developing applications, and I just want to be sure that that folks who are using and they're getting a great benefit out of SharePoint and Office 365 today. But I just want to be sure that the folks are aware that there are incrementally easy ways to develop custom applications on the platform and get greater value out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times people are thinking that, okay, I have a custom need, I want to develop a custom application on the platform, and they're thinking kind of the most extreme, the most complicated case of developing applications in SharePoint, when in fact there are really at least 4 levels of application development on the platform before you get into that mode that people normally think of as developing applications on the platform. So I really wanted people to be aware just how easy it is to really configure and customize the platform to get greater value out of it.
I could see how, like right now, probably as people are moving to the cloud, that customization might be a dirty word, right? Because some of the things that might be prohibiting them from moving all the way into the cloud. So what you're trying to say is with this is basically don't think that when we talk about building apps on Office 365 that you're necessarily talking about things like full trust code and building out a custom app that sort of what we've thought about in the past, that things have actually changed with Office 365.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think you've highlighted a key concern. People do have fear, so they think of this as a multi-tenant environment.
Mm-hmm.
My organization is new to Office 365, and folks have a natural concern about anything which they think of as custom applications that are developed in the cloud and in this new kind of cloud environment. But in fact, and as we go through these options, you'll see that there are options which are really isolated,
Mm-hmm.
only to one particular site and only one particular location within the cloud. So I just want to alleviate concerns that when I'm customizing the environment that it could have a broader impact.
Gotcha. Now the first one that you start out with is this is SharePoint out of the box configuration. Tell me a little bit more about that one.
Right. So this one, there's a huge amount of power and capability in SharePoint merely from creating and configuring lists.
Mm-hmm.
So really the SharePoint out of the box configuration, this is lists and libraries. There are great, Office 365 has great support for Office document types as well as video document types. So one of the popular options that we've had have been with configuring video portals that allow users to easily find and view videos in Office 365. So there's a lot of options, which is really just configuring lists, libraries, and custom views.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have views that help you easily find records, documents, and videos. Grouping and sorting, and that's really just configuration. But there's a great value that people can see just with that.
Awesome. And now the next one that you have is workflow applications. Are these getting more complex as we work our way down, or what's happening as
Yep.
we look?
Yep,
through
exactly.
each of these?
Yeah, so these are incrementally, getting more and more complex as we go, but really not a lot more complex as we
Okay.
go. They're really a gradual step, and so the next one, is workflow applications. So what I'm referring to here are SharePoint Designer workflows. So and there are out-of-the-box workflows that are provided. For example, approval workflows. We were working recently on a project that made use of document sets and an approval workflow for that document set. And this document set was around purchase orders and then the invoices that are charged against those purchase orders. And so there was an approval process for invoices and the purchase order, and that was just an out-of-the-box approval workflow.
Nice, nice. Now the next one that you have is site pages and JavaScript applications. Tell me about that.
Yep, so this one is a pretty big jump in the functionality that you get, but it's not a real big jump in terms of the complexity, the developer complexity. So we are getting into JavaScript, we are getting into custom pages, but these JavaScript files and the custom pages, they're really being uploaded, or we use the word injected, so they're kind of being injected into this particular site. And it's only, the scope of that application is only a specific site, and these are cases where maybe we might have custom forms or custom pages to support a business process, but still in terms of the developer complexity and the impact, to the Office 365 environment, it's very low, same as the first two options.
Gotcha. And next one is Windows Desktop and Click Once applications.
Right, so up until this point, we've really been looking at either, just simply configuring SharePoint, or we've had what are really called, we would refer to as browser customizations. But now, with the Windows Desktop and Click Once applications, these are options where, we have some more heavy custom application development that needs to occur. For example, one project that we worked on used a Click Once application to generate PDF documents. And so, back in the old days, this would have been server-side code running on the SharePoint server. But with Windows Desktop applications and Click Once apps, we can take that heavy, code-centric processing and move it off onto a desktop application or as a Click Once app.
Nice, nice. Now the final one that we have here is SharePoint Apps.
Yeah, so SharePoint Apps, so all the way to the end, of the five that I've listed, what I see is the most complex, but it's also the richest in terms of the features that you can build into it. And SharePoint Apps, these are what most people think of. When folks out in the field are saying, I need to create some custom applications, SharePoint Apps is what people are almost always thinking of. And part of this blog post is really in a way to discourage that, because SharePoint Apps, that's where we're looking usually for like an Azure environment. These are called provider hosted apps, where the heavy processing and the UI is hosted really outside of SharePoint. And these have the greatest amount of functionality, but they also have the infrastructure that you need to have set up, and they're the most complex of the five, and they're really the kind of app that of course we'd like to see more of, but it's really here in part to illustrate that there's a lot that can be done before you get all the way to SharePoint Apps.
Nice, nice. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to spell these different options out. One last question. It seems like if you have all these different options, how do you decide which one you go with? Is there I don't know if there's a thought that I guess you want to start with the simpler modes first, and then decide if it has to have some functionality that requires a SharePoint app, then you go with that, or is there any rules of thumb or anything that you've run by that sort of determines what you end up doing?
Right. I would say, I always favor this in my application design is shoot for the simplest approach that will meet the need. However, you don't want to be too short-sighted, so be thinking about, what is this application going to look like, in the next, 2 or 3 releases, and also be thinking about, what will it take to sort of translate. If I take a simpler approach that I don't think is going to meet my needs down the road, be thinking about what's it going to take to translate that, sort of simple approach into a more complicated design down the road. For example, maybe I might start with site pages and JavaScript applications, which is sort of my third tier out of 5, and then maybe down the road I might want a full-blown SharePoint app because I have some back-end processing that's necessary, and that's think about what kind of a jump that is. But off the cuff, it's usually not that big of a jump because you're just kind of moving those things from SharePoint into a provider-hosted environment.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to lay out these options for us. And for any of the listeners, if you're interested in building out apps on Office 365, please feel free to drop by our website, threewill.com, and look for this blog post, Top 5 Ways Your Application Can Be Built on SharePoint and Office 365. Drop by, leave a comment for Eric if you've got other things that you want to add to the conversation, and we really appreciate it. Thank you, Eric, for your time.
You bet.
And we appreciate you listening to this podcast.